So, Chapter 6 is called Governance and Finance of U.S. Schools. The chapter discusses why we need to understand educational politics, how the local community influences schools, what powers and influence states have in governing schools, how regional education agencies assist schools, and how the federal government influences schools, and what role teachers play in school governance, and how are schools financed in the U.S., trends in funding for equity and excellence, and how will the privatization movement affect equity and excellence in education. So, understanding educational politics is important for professional knowledge. Parents, students, teachers, administrators, taxpayers, federal, state, and local authorities, ethnic and racial groups, educational theorists, researchers, the corporate sector, and special interest groups exert political influence on education. So I have spent my first week teaching, and as much as you wish that you can just work as a teacher and not deal with any of those other outside factors, that's just not the reality. Everything, so there's so many factors that influence the way that we are even able to teach within our classroom. I think, for example, in my own class, because of the push for higher standards and testing, the class I'm teaching is a law class. My students are going to have to complete an end of course exam. And in talking to the instructional specialist, she kind of informed me that I won't know what's on the test. So I'm going to have to prepare my students for an exam that I have no idea what is going to be on the exam, but I have to teach them in a way that they'll be prepared for it. And, it wasn't the instructional specialist's idea to have this exam. This goes back to local government. Again, the push for higher standards, testing, and accountability, which I understand is completely necessary and helpful in education. But now, being on the ground level, being in a school and seeing how it affects teaching, I think, wow, it's that those things, they carry a lot of weight. Politics, I mean, it runs so much of what happens within the school. And then you have within the school politics that influence instructional and curricular practices within a school. I mean, again, there's just so many factors, and as much as you wish it could just be about teaching, it's not, and you have to keep all those things in mind as you're trying to do your job and teach students. And I guess in some ways too, I'm beginning in a time when this is normal. This is just the way things are. I should expect to have these end of course exams, and I should expect to have my evaluation tied to it. And I don't know any different. There are teachers who have been teaching so long that they remember a time when that wasn't the case, when they felt like it was more about teaching. And then you have other teachers that have been teaching that were around for No Child Left Behind, and they had an experience with that legislation and the way that it impacted their teaching then. And so it's so interesting, and I'm realizing that pretty quick. So how does the local community influence schools? Local school districts vary greatly in size, locale, organizational structure, demographics, and wealth, and are responsible for the management and operation of schools. Local school boards, whose members are usually elected, set educational policies for a district. However, many people believe that boards should be reformed to be better informed and more responsive. The superintendent and chief administrator of a local district has a complex array of responsibilities and must work cooperatively with the school board and others in an environment that is often politically turbulent. Groups like PTA or PTO, some parents are more involved in local school activities and reform efforts. Others are involved with private schools, and some actively promote alternative approaches. I've seen that at the elementary school level, at the school my children attend, there's a very strong and influential PTO group. I mean, they have a sense of there's like a sense of like ownership over the school, and they can kind of guide the activities that happen in the school. They're very much a political force to be reckoned with. And I've heard, at other schools, principals can be kind of, I guess, pushed on by this group because their voice is so strong, and they carry so much weight that the principals kind of feel pressure to give in to what they're asking or consider them when making decisions for the school. So I know that, principals feel that kind of pressure from parent groups sometimes. What powers and influence do states have in governing schools? Well, like I mentioned, here in the state of New Mexico, I mean, every public school goes through the public education department, and I mean, they have requirements, and they have rules and regulations that school districts have to follow. And that's just how it is in the public schools. And then the states have federal guidelines, and there's school accreditation and so many things that they have to just contend with. And so there's a lot of powers that influence a lot of state power over public schools in the state. And how do regional education agencies assist schools? The Regional Educational Service Agency, an intermediate unit of educational administration in about half of states, provides assistance to 2 or more school districts for staff development, curricula development, instructional media, and program evaluation. I worked for a cooperative that served the 89 school districts here in New Mexico. I was an administrative assistant for them. That's kind of what, I guess, influenced my decision to become a teacher. And I know they provided ancillary services to school districts. Again, staff development. They had instructional coaches that could go to school districts. They provided complimentary training. I mean, they did so much to help the school districts here in New Mexico. How does the federal government influence education? That's a no-brainer. They absolutely influence education. The U.S. Department of Education supports and disseminates educational research, administers federal grants in education, and assists the president in developing and promoting a national agenda for education. At times, the role of the federal, state, and local governments in education are in conflict. Yes, that is very true. What role do teachers play in school governance? Teachers have many opportunities to provide leadership for school reform, including leadership in areas such as teaching as a profession, equity, school organization, and assessment of student learning, and curriculum and instruction. So I guess, honestly, I think a lot of teachers go on to become principals because they would actually like to have a bigger role in school governance. And who better to lead than people who know exactly what the job entails and what students' needs are. But I wish it was kind of more of a fluid transition. I feel like once a teacher becomes a principal and has a leadership role, they have, again, those other political forces to deal with, and maybe they're not able to do all the things necessary that they once thought, oh, well, if I was the principal, I would do this, because they realize that they don't have the freedom to do that. It's not how it works. And so I wish it was a more solid transition. I wish that teachers who become principals were able to make those changes that would make schools great, because they absolutely know what schools and students need. I mean, who better? They're there. How are schools financed in the U.S.? So the Great Recession that began in 2008 resulted in severe shortfalls in local, state, and federal budgets, and these shortfalls are continuing to have a great impact on school funding. Schools are supported with revenues from local, state, and federal levels, with most funding coming from the state level. Local funding is provided through property taxes, which in many instances results in inequitable funding for schools located in areas with an insufficient tax base. One challenge to financing schools has been the development of an equitable means of taxation for the support of education. And I know bonds are another way, just, if people can vote for them, but it's complicated. So what are some trends in funding for equity and excellence? Inequities among school districts often reflect differences in the value of property that can be taxed for the support of schools. Many state legislators have enacted tax reforms, including full funding programs that set the same per pupil expenditures for all schools and districts. Some states have achieved greater equity through redistricting, redrawing district boundaries to reduce funding inequities, and some states achieve vertical equity by providing additional funding or categorical aid to educate students with special needs. Also, many school districts and schools receive additional funding through partnerships with the private sector or community groups, and school choice or voucher programs are two controversial approaches to providing parents the freedom to select the schools their children attend. I know Kohl's offers some sort of program where if they attend an event, they'll give the school a certain amount of money. Other schools, simply don't have the means, or even how the money is spread out within the school itself. Certain grade levels have their own budget versus other grade levels. My daughter is in kinder. We recently paid $10 to go on a field trip. My son is in second grade, and we paid, nothing. So I guess it kind of depends how that money is distributed within the school. And how will the privatization movement affect equity and excellence in education? Charter schools and for-profit schools, both part of the privatization movement, were developed in response to perceived inadequacies of public schools. Charter schools are independent, innovative, outcome-based public schools started by a group of teachers, parents, or others who obtain a charter from a local school district, a state, or the federal government. Research on charter schools is mixed. Some studies show that charter school students outperform students at other schools, whereas other studies show the opposite. K-12 Incorporated, or Inc., is an example of a for-profit school operated by private corporations, and for-profit schools owned by teachers, administrators, and other stakeholders have been suggested as one way to improve the quality of schools. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm sure there's great charter schools and great private schools, and I'm sure there's others that are just not great, and would be better under, I guess, the watchful eye of a state or local government entity that can kind of supervise them, and then there's probably certain public schools that would just thrive if they were free of those restrictions. So it's hard to say, but I think that public schools, like anything really, there's always room for improvement. And like I said, I think if teachers